Good evening and good day to whoever joined this broadcast. Good evening and welcome to Tel Aviv, to our group of 2022 Hispanic Community Leaders Delegation, who we are hosting in Israel from July 10 to the 17th, partnering with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Today's program is an extensive of their visit. But before we invite Professor Tamar Hermann, who is sitting next to me, our guest speaker, I would like to invite three of our partners, our friends and members of the delegation, to tell us a little about their opportunity and about their experience here in Israel. So we will start with Maria Wine. Please, Maria, please stand up.
Well, thank you, Ruby, and thank you, Ruben. Shalom, everybody. I just wanted to say thank you to the American-Israeli Friendship League and to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Israel for having us all here. This has been truly an outstanding 36 hours plus, to put it in perspective. That's the time that we've been here. It's just been marvelous to be able to really get a sense for this country, which, while it occupies a small footprint that can be traveled north to south in 8 hours and in minutes east to west, has such profound historical meaning for the world and for many of us from a religious and spiritual perspective. But what has struck me most from day to day is that when we look at Israel and when we wake up every morning and get on the bus and begin to absorb all of it, history meets innovation every single day. And whether it is the history of the country or the innovative things that are happening across this geography, they're just tremendous. And they're meeting challenges across the world, whether it be with drip technology for making sure that there's irrigation in areas that don't have the ability to get irrigated fields and to be able to stimulate the growth of crops, or the innovation that it takes to really defend this country. This is a country that is fierce about its democracy. It is fierce about doing well in the world and leaving the world a better place. We have been so fortunate to have a really great introduction to Mashav and the efforts that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has put forth across the world to help communities near and far. So it's just been just marvelous to see history emerge from the ground. We were in a village yesterday, first century synagogue that was found when the ground decided to give it up in 2009. And it's been a marvelous discovery. So there are profound moments of spiritual discovery, as well as profound moments of just understanding history and the challenges of living together while living apart and trying to make inclusion really work. So it's just been an honor to be here. Thank you so very much for having us.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you very, very much. I'm so excited with my new friends here. So Alfie, now, please. Alfie Mesa.
Thank you, Ruby. Thank you so much to you and the America-Israel Friendship League, to your board, and all of the participants, my fellow participants. We're so grateful for this opportunity. One of the things that I have reflected on since we've been here, and I echo everything that Maria has said, is as Americans, we have a sense of belonging. We could be from many places from around the world, different backgrounds. Many of us even come from different countries. We're from different parts of the United States. America makes us we're united. We have a united identity. There's a sense of belonging. Something I wasn't expecting to feel, but now in Israel I have felt, is also how you can be from anywhere in the world. And once you're here, there is a shared identity, whether it's an identity of faith, an identity of the immigrant experience, shared values as Americans and Israelis, a commitment to democracy and freedom of speech, a commitment to letting people do with their lives and their talents and gifts and have a course for their lives that can provide for their family and to contribute to the greater good. It's that sense of belonging, right? We can go back to our, respective states and we're at home. But what I did not expect was to be here and to visit the holy sites and to feel at home. And I'm Roman Catholic, right? And it's so true for many of the different individuals who have not only made this their home, but made this a place that truly they feel like they belong. So not only are Americans and Israelis united on so many fronts of values, but I can't think of two other countries that have that sense of belonging like the United States of America and the state of Israel. So thank you for that experience.
Thank you, Alfie. And I think that I can say on behalf of the America-Israel Friendship League that it's only a beginning of our relationship with all of you. And we really feel like family, and we will continue. This is just the beginning. So thank you. Now I would like to call upon Sofia Bork. Sofia, another member of the delegation.
Wonderful. Muchas gracias, Ruby and everyone. My name is Sofia Bork. I think something that to me has been really beautiful when I think about this delegation is meeting so many different Latinos from across the US, and we all have different experiences, different identities. But when we come together, just being able to work as intentional allies and advocates for not only the Jewish community, but Israel in general. Israel is home to so many different communities, ethnicities, religious identities. And when we can come together, and as Latinos, I think we know what it's like to be that immigrant experience. Even if we were born here, there is somebody in our family who we love dearly who wasn't born here. And I think that sense of shared identity really bonds us with the Israeli people, with the Jewish people as well. When we think of that shared Judeo-Christian identity, the monotheistic identity as well, it can really work to bring us all together in essence. And that's something that I've been really thankful for, because I feel like this trip will empower each and every one of us to be able to advocate for the Jewish people, because now we can understand what we have walked the paths that so many of our forefathers in faith, if you are Christian, or just, when you think of the Bible, you can see it as a religious text, yet you can also see it as a work of literature, because all of the books are inspired by different time periods. So from a historical, an artistic, and a literary perspective, this land offers so much. And I think it is so beautiful the way that the desert is juxtaposed with the fertile valleys, the orchards, the innovation that Alfie and Maria both referred to. And this land has offered so much to us in just such a short time. And I'm so thankful to the America-Israel Friendship League and the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs for this wonderful and enriching experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you all for being here with us. I would like now to call upon our speaker, Professor Tamar Hermann. Professor Tamar Hermann is a political scientist who specializes in tracking and gauging public opinion, grassroots politics, and the phenomenon of political protest. Hermann is the academic director of the Gutman Center for Public Opinion and Policy Research at the Israeli Democracy Institute, and a faculty member of the Political Science Department of the Open University of Israel, where she was vice president for academic affairs. Together with Professor Ephraim Yair Youthman of Tel Aviv University, Professor Hermann was the editor of the monthly Peace Index survey project between 1994 and 2018. Tamar, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Ruby. I'm very glad to be here with you, and I'll try not to spoil your evening too much with politics and sociology, because, you came to Israel in a time where we are expecting another round of elections, the fifth one in 3 years. And your president is visiting us. I mean, he landed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So the combination of some hopes for some breakthrough in the relations, particularly with Saudi Arabia, not so much with the Palestinians. If you'll ask me later, I'll talk a bit about this as well. But I'll try to give you some I would say, a blueprint or a sketch of the socio-political landscape here, okay? So when you hear people talking about certain notions, you'll understand what they are talking about. Basically, our political system is very different than that of the United States. We are a parliamentary democracy, not a presidential democracy. We have a prime minister, we have a one-chamber parliament of 120 members of Knesset, and we have many parties in this parliament. Over the years, the lowest number of parties was 7 and the highest was 14. This means that we are always having a coalition government. And in order to maintain or keep together a government composed of 9, 10, 11, 12 parties, everyone have to make concessions, which makes everyone dissatisfied with the political outcome. But it also gives us the opportunity of having, I would say, proper representation of different political agendas. So the good side is having representation of smaller groups that otherwise, if we had like the first past the post or this kind of majoritarian system, we wouldn't have them in the parliament. But when they are in the parliament, of course, they are fighting over resources, they are fighting over the state's agenda, and so on and so forth. So we are in an ongoing political turbulence all the time, never a quiet moment here, as a very popular song here says, either a festival or a scandal. So, and with the weather, you know, it's a bit too much in the summer. So we are going to have another 5th elections on November 1st. And right now, there is a stalemate between the two political blocs. And we don't know whether we are not going to see a 6th election in the next couple of months or a year. The political consultants are making good money here because they are always being employed by someone. And they move from one party to another. So let's see what we have here so you'll understand a bit better. I'll talk about the issue of Israel being a Jewish or democratic state, because the formal definition of the state of Israel is Jewish and democratic. Apparently, this hyphenated definition should have been translated into like a state standing on 2 legs, the Jewish one and the democratic one. Unfortunately, it is not happening. And the democratic leg is getting a bit shorter compared to the Jewish one, which has far-reaching implication on everything here. I'll talk about the socio-political challenges within the Jewish sector. I'll talk about the relations between Jews and Arabs in Israel, the majority group and the minority group, not the Palestinian in the occupied territories, the Israeli Arabs who are full citizens of Israel, because there are about 20% of the population. I'll talk about the political landscape, public trust, or I should say distrust of the political institutions. Surely you are familiar with that from the United States. We are a bit better in that, for example, vis-a-vis the Supreme Court. Your latest polls are quite disturbing about the number of people who are supportive of or have trust in your Supreme Court. We are a bit higher, but not much higher for the very same reasons, because, you know, everything is global nowadays, and the discussions and the disagreements that you have in the United States between Republicans and Democrats, we see things that are quite similar in Israel, with some, of course, local differences, but in a way, we disagree about the same issues: women's rights, LGBT rights, abortion, state and religion. You are better on the state and religion issue. You have resolved it with your constitution. We don't have a constitution, by the way. Israel is the only democracy besides the UK that doesn't have a constitution. And we don't have a constitution because it was impossible to agree upon that when the state was established in 1948. And then this constitutional moment just passed. And nowadays it's very, very difficult to agree on a constitution, because we know that constitutions can be put on the table after a revolution, after a war of independence, after a critical moment. And for better and for worse, we don't have such critical moments anymore. And there are particularly the religious segments of the Israeli population, and of course the Israeli politicians think that the Bible that you mentioned so often is the constitution, the proper constitution of a Jewish state. Apparently, the secular segment of the population disagree with that. The secular segment would have liked to see a liberal constitution like all other liberal states have. So we are stuck in a corner here, and I don't see this being resolved in the future. And I'll talk a bit about the Palestinian question. Ruby, the next slide. Okay, what you see here is the population of Israel. As I mentioned, about 20% are Arabs, and about 80% are Jewish. But it's more tricky than that. The Arab population is much younger than the Jewish population. And when you see the 80% of the Jews, this is a statistical trick done by the Central Statistics Bureau. Because in the past, they used to show Jews on the one hand and Arabs and others on the other hand. Others are like people who come, refugees from other countries, foreign workers, or people who came, from example, for the former Soviet Union after its collapse and are married, for example, to Jewish people, but are not Jewish themselves, maybe they are Christians, maybe they are atheists. So in the past, it was Arabs and others, and Jews on the other side. However, the relative share of the Arabs and other increased. So the Central Statistics Bureau decided to have now Arabs on the one hand and Jews and others on the other hand. This keeps the Jewish majority on the graphs bigger enough in order to state this is a Jewish state, not a Jewish and others, okay? So this is how you can play with statistics, but if you read the smaller, letters beneath, you can understand why did they do it and understand what's the logic. Because the Arabs, the Israeli Arabs and the leaders are actually challenging the definition of the state as Jewish and democratic, and they would like to see it being defined as a state of all its citizens, which gives the Jewish majority the creeps, because the Jews would like to maintain this as the nation state of the Jewish people. Actually, in June 2018, a law was enacted in which it was stated, the first time black and white, as the follows, saying this is the nation state of the Jewish people and the Jewish people only. This suffix is something that would not allow the Israeli Arabs to argue in the future that they are equal on that level with the Jews. I should, however, mention here that Israeli Arab citizens have all individual legal rights like Jews. They vote in the elections, they get the state's benefits and social security, medical assistance, everything. But what they don't have are collective rights as a national collective. They cannot challenge the anthem of the state, which says something about the hope of the Jewish people to return to the land of their forefathers. They cannot change the flag, even if they wished, with the which is like it's full of Jewish symbols. The flag of the state. And even the Supreme Court in Israel, which is thought upon as the bastion of liberalism, have never acknowledged the collective rights of the Arab citizens as a national collective. Okay, so we are we are going to face a severe problem in the future. In the past, that it would be even more severe because the birth rate of the Arabs was higher than that of the Jews. So people talked about the demographic bomb. They are not talking about it anymore because the birth rate of the Jews and the Arabs are exactly the same, because Arab women have become more educated. The more educated women are, the less kids they are. And on the Jewish side, the ultra-Orthodox, the very religious people, and the Orthodox are having more and more kids. And even the secular, because of the very good economic situation, are having more kids than they used to have, certainly in the past. If we look at the composition of the Jewish population, and I segmented it by level of religiosity, you can see that the plurality, the bluish part, are secular. Secular used to be the majority in the past, but in the last 20 years or so, they've become only a plurality, not a majority. Then you see two groups, the greenish ones. These are the traditionalists. They are divided to traditionalists more secular and traditionalists more religious. And they have different opinions, but traditionalist means that they are more attached to the Jewish tradition. They may practice certain aspects of Jewish religion, but they are not religious. When you talk to them, they always aspire to become more religious. However, life has its own dynamics, and they would like to go to the beach on Saturday. But if they would have turned religious, they couldn't have travel over this. So that they find their own, combination of what they should do or not do. For example, they will always eat kosher, but they may drive on Shabbat, and they certainly have lights on, electricity. They use electricity on the it's a kind of one foot here, one foot there, with individual combinations, because in the very same family, you can find some members who do go every Saturday to the synagogue, and some sleep very late on the weekends. It's a more flexible way of living. And then we have the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox. Ruby, you have covered my slide.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Otherwise, they don't see you.
Then you have the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox. That's fine. Now let's move to the next slide. And I forgot to change the words into English, but I'll explain. The blue line on top are those who define themselves as being on the right side of the political spectrum. Okay, you can see that it is much higher than the other two camps. The purple one are the center, and the lower, the greenish one is the left. In the past, in the 90s, for example, we used to talk about 50-50. 50 center left and 50 right. This is not the situation anymore. The right is much stronger, not necessarily electorally, but in the sense of people's self-identification with the ideas of the right. What does it mean to be on the right? In the 90s, it meant unwillingness to make compromises on the Israeli-Palestinian issue. No territorial compromise, no nothing, even annexation of the occupied territories. As they say, by the way, the right doesn't use the term occupied territories. They will say Judea and Samaria. So the minute you hear someone saying Judea and Samaria, you can be quite sure that this lady or gentleman belong to the right side of the political spectrum, or that they are religious. And I'll show you in a minute the juxtaposition of being religious and being in one of these political camps. Center is fluid. It is in a way like the traditionalists. You mean they are more to the right on security issues, but they are more to the left on women's rights, LGBT rights, state and religion, and so on and so forth. They also have their individual combinations. Every individual who say that they are in the center, you'll ask them, what do you think about this and what do you think about that? And they will not necessarily think the same. Nowadays, we have between 3 to 4 centrist parties, and they are very different from each other. Allegedly, they could have allied themselves with both the right on security issues and the left on other issues. Nowadays, many at the center have a problem with aligning themselves with the right because they dislike Netanyahu's and they resent the idea of him becoming the next prime minister of Israel. So many of them, if Netanyahu is off the political scene, they will return to the right because they don't have ideological problems with the right, many of them, not all of them. And the idea of a centrist ideology is in a way something that is very difficult to actually write down black and white because of these differences in the tones. Okay, there are different shades of purple, if you wish, but it's very difficult to put them together. And if there was no the Bibi in or Bibi out question, they would not necessarily have been a political bloc. Then at the bottom, you have the left. Why is it so interesting? Because left used to be the dominant political camp in Israel, right? The pioneers that started what eventually developed into the state of Israel, they were all socialists. They came from Russia, from Poland, from wherever. They were hardcore socialists. They were not social democrats, okay? And they controlled the state political scene with an iron fist, actually, until 1977, when there was a total political transition in Israel and the revisionists on the right took over. Now I'll share with you an individual anecdote. I come from, it's no wonder that I'm a political scientist because my mother came from a labor-style socialist family, and my father was a revisionist, which means that he was on the right. And every dinner, they fought about everything that there is in this state. And I remember myself in bed, covering up my head and thinking to myself, tomorrow they will divorce for sure. They are going to divorce for sure. It didn't happen. I mean, but it was an issue within families, not only, you know, on the collective level. It was something that they fought about, and they always fought about the past. They didn't fight about the future. And this is perhaps not very typical, but it happens here. Next slide, Ruby, please. Okay, I told you that I'll show you the correlation between people's positioning along the religiosity spectrum and their political affiliation. Now, on your left side, you see the ultra Orthodox community, and they are very much on the right. Okay, 3% on the left, 11% in the center. So if we are going to have elections, as we are going to have elections, for sure they will vote for either ultra-Orthodox parties or a very radical right-wing party, which was actually established before the last elections and is gaining the support of the younger age cohort of the ultra-Orthodox. It is called religious Zionism. And it is very much to the right. I would dare say that they are a proto-fascist party. Okay. Now the ultra-Orthodox parties, which in the past got the ultra-Orthodox community votes in its entirety, are now a bit anxious because of this new right-wing party, because the youngsters, in order to rebel against the rabbi's authority and against their families, are now tending more and more to vote for this right-wing party. And for seculars who are at the center or on the left, they don't know which is worse. These young people voting for the ultra-Orthodox parties or for these proto-fascist parties, it's not going to be a good thing from this venture point. Now the Orthodox are also very much on the right, very similar to the ultra-Orthodox. Then you have the traditionalists, remember, those who decide for themselves whether to drive on Saturday or not. They are less to the right, but still they have a small majority, 57%, identifying themselves with the right. About quarter in the center and a small minority on the left. And then you see the secular, the largest but not the majority. They are almost equally divided between the three political blocs. Without knowing anything about Israelis politics, if you look on that graph, you can be a commentator for your local TV about the future results of the elections. Okay, you can guess where it is heading with one reservation. As I told you, we always have a coalition government. So it might well be that due to various considerations that we will see some alignments, as we saw after the former elections in 2021, that will pull the rug from under the feet of the right, but we don't know. It's like a lottery. And so that don't bet on the elections results when you go to Vegas next time, at least before November 1st. Now, what I'll show you now is a very complicated graph. We had a presentation or workshop in our institute about how not to make presentations and graphs like that, but I couldn't do it in a better way. They said very few words, very few numbers, very few colors, but I couldn't. But what I wanted to show you here is what happened since 2012 to 2021, and actually the red figures on top are of 2022, about the main tensions in Israeli society. אם תקחי את זה לכאן, הם יוכלו לראות את הכותרת. את השחור הזה תורידי למטה. לא, את כל הליין הזה. אוקיי, תני לי רגע. I'd like to show you the... Okay? These are the strongest tensions in Israel. את לא צריכה לזוז כרגע כלום. תחזירי את זה. As you can see, we saw a gradual increase in the percentage of those pointing to the left and right tension as the main tension in Israel. and the reduction until 2021 of the tension between Jews and Arabs. However, in 2021, something happened. Actually, two things happened. One thing was on May 2021, we had a military excursion in Gaza, or if you want a military campaign or a small war. We are used to small wars, so we don't call them wars even, although some rockets hit Tel Aviv at the time, which created the turbulence between Jews and Arabs within Israel in the mixed cities. Okay, and this was the first time ever since the independence that we had this kind of violent clashes en masse, in large masses between Jews and Arabs. So many decided that the main tension is between Jews and Arabs. And we had another thing that was actually of a different kind. And on June, when the government was created, we had for the first time ever an Arab party in the coalition, for the first time ever. They served as safety net outside of the coalition in the past, for example, under Prime Minister Rabin, but they were never part of the coalition. The last government, we had them in the government. Not only we had them in the government, this was an Islamicist party. Can you imagine an Israeli parliament having an Islamicist party? I mean, people just couldn't, I mean, it blew people's mind. This Islamicist party was in its ideology, in fact, much closer to the more conservative parts of Israel's society and political scene. They were much closer to the ultra-Orthodox party in terms of women's rights, in terms of abortions, and all. But they made an exceptional step by joining government, which had some very major left-wing components, socialist components, universalist components, and they managed, actually, what the head of this government, of this party said, I don't care about big things. I just want to take care of my people, and I'm joining this government, not because I like everyone in this coalition, but because I want to improve the situation of the Israeli Arabs in terms of money, in terms of construction, in terms of education, medicine, you name it, okay? And he played his cards very, very well within the government. However, many Jews, particularly on the right, were deeply upset by that. They said, this guy is an Islamicist. He's actually a collaborator with Hamas, with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. You just name it. He is a fifth column within the government. And one of the reasons why this government fell was because of that, because people attacked it for having this component within the government, okay, who allegedly served foreign interests within the government. Now, we will wait and see what will happen after the elections, because we have some evidence that before the last government was established, actually Netanyahu negotiated with the head of this government, with this party, in order to have him on a right-wing government, which content-wise was his right place. Besides the issue of the Jewish nature of the state and the occupied territories, because on all other issues, the centrality of religion and so on and so forth, he could have felt at home there. But he was taking the opportunity and joined another government. We'll see what will happen after the next elections. Imagine that he will, with his party seats in the Knesset, will be the one that may enable Netanyahu to have a right-wing government. Will Netanyahu invite him to join? I mean, we don't know, but it may be quite ironic if after all the attacks on him, on Bennett as the prime minister, Netanyahu eventually, who opened the door for this Islamist party, will eventually end up with them in the coalition. So as I said, it will either be a festival or a scandal. Next slide. Okay. As I told you, we have a question to be dealt with, or a challenge to be dealing with, about the status of the Israeli Arab citizens of Israel. Many of them identify with the Palestinian cause. They see themselves as Palestinians. Actually, they are more cautious than that. When we ask them an open-ended question and we ask them, how do you define themselves, without giving them any options that we thought of, they will be quite hesitant to say Palestinians because they don't know who is on the other side of the phone. And it's not with the Arabs, we do it over the phone, but with Jews, we do it online. Okay? Mostly they will say, I'm an Arab, not a Palestinian. But if you sit over coffee with them, they say, I side with the Palestinian side because I feel as part of the Palestinian people, Palestinian history, Palestinian culture, Palestinian tradition. So we ask our interviewees and Arab citizens of Israel who feels part of the Palestinian people, can he also be a loyal Israeli citizen? Okay, we have a problem here, okay? Because at least I would say that the larger share of the Jews are not happy with this combination. And then we very often say to them, what about the American Jews? They are both American and they are Jewish, okay? Then they will say, well, the Jewish people is not an enemy of the United States, whereas the Palestinians are enemies of Israel. So this dual identity is not a problem when you have Jews who are loyal American citizens. But as long as the conflict is going on, then this dual or hyphenated definition is problematic because what will happen when they'll face the test by fire? Will they side with the Palestinians or with the Israeli side? If we're going to have a war in which, in the past, they never interfered with any war on the side of the Palestinians, but who knows, they may serve as a fifth column in Israel in time of war. So maybe this combination is a bit too early for us to legitimize. Okay, of course, from the Arab point of view, it's very problematic because for them it would have been best to be able to define themselves as both. We can move ahead. Okay, now we move to other issue, trust in government institution, in state institution. And this is 2022, 3 weeks ago. IDF, the Israeli army, on the Jewish side, 85%, and it's always between 80% to 90%. They have full trust in the IDF. Okay, this is actually, I would say, maybe the only remained holy cow in Israel that people are looking up to, and it makes sense because the IDF is perceived as the best guarantor of Israel's security. Most people have served or serve in the army. Our children go to the army, men and women, by the way. There is compulsory service in Israel for both boys and girls. So the IDF is something that is very close to all Israelis. It is not like the American army, who are professional military personnel. You may live your entire life not knowing even one soldier or having some direct contact in the United States. But in Israel, it's very different. Okay, we see them in the streets. We have them in our family. We served in the army or still serving in the army. So the IDF is at the top, but we see some decrease in the trust for the army as well, for reasons that are too complicated to explain now. Second comes the president of Israel. Okay, no, please go back. 58% amongst the Jews, only 17% amongst the Arabs, although this president, the former president, were very much or very sensitive to the issue of the Arab citizens' rights, but still they are a symbol of the state. Supreme Court, 40% amongst the Jews, 41% amongst the Arabs, because the Supreme Court is actually the savior of the Israeli Arabs and the Palestinians who also appear to the Supreme Court. And this is why the right side of the political spectrum in Israel is not happy with the Supreme Court, because they see them as serving those liberal ideas that may ruin the state of Israel if they are being pursued by the Supreme Court. Okay, but the Supreme Court actually translates the principle of equality, and those on the right, certainly on the radical right, are not very happy with this equality between Jews and Arabs within Israel. Police, police is never likened anywhere. I mean, they don't do you any good. I mean, they give you tickets. When you really need them, they are not there, or sometimes they shoot you, I mean, by mistake or not by mistake. So to be a policeman is not a very, popular thing in many countries, not only in Israel. The media is low because it is being thought of as serving the agenda of the left. Although this is not true, in recent years we have many right-wingers in the various media channels, but the stigma stays. Government, parliament, and political parties, they are at the bottom. But this happens in every liberal democracies. In every liberal democracies, parties, administration, and parliament are at the very bottom. And this is in a way paradoxical, because the elected bodies are less trustworthy in the eyes of the public than the professional ones, like the military, the police, and whatever. But this is part of the crisis of liberal democracies in recent years, and they don't see them as serving the general good. They see them as parochial, as egotistic, as serving some specific groups' interests, and so on and so forth. Okay. Able to influence the government policy? Not good at all. As you can see, there are hardly any differences between Jews and Arabs. Both these Israeli sectors think that they may vote, they may have opinions, and the Israeli electorate is highly opinionated and political, but they can't influence the decision makers. So this sense of incompetence or inefficacy is something which is very problematic for a viable democracy. But it went through a long chain of governments, not unique to the here and now. It's almost since the early days of history of Israel. Next. Okay, maybe this would be my last slide. Is the Israeli democratic system in grave danger? We see a slight increase over the years. Now we have almost 60% who think that we are in grave danger. However, when you ask them why and what kind of a danger, the answers given you by the right and the left are totally different. On the right, they tell you the Supreme Court is too strong. Those liberals are going to ruin the state. They will give everything to the Arabs and what have you. And on the left side, they say the administration is running off the Supreme Court. They are trying to crush the spirit of universalist values as embodied in the Supreme Court. and so on and so forth. So they may be in the same position in terms of feeling that there is some danger in the horizon, but what kind of a danger they disagree upon. So I think I'll stop here. There might be some more slides, but I think that we should stop. And please go ahead.
Yeah, so Tammy, I would like to thank Tamar. Your data was an eye opener for me as well as an Israeli, I must say. We will open the floor for questions. Let's start. Nomi, I suggest you'll bring the first question because we are staying here with Tamar after the hour, after 8 o'clock or 1 o'clock your time. Please.
Sure. Professor Hermann, thank you so much for that presentation. I found it fascinating. I'm curious to start off the questions. How does Israeli democracy compare to other democracies around the world? I'm not sure if you study those as well, but I'm curious if other democracies, if people tend to have more faith in their governments, less faith, if there's as many divides in the societies, or if Israel is a unique case.
Okay, I think I have it.
Yeah. Ah,
Should
no. Ah, okay.
okay. Should I use the mic? No. You know, every country is different, but basically we see the same trends in Israel like we see in most other Western democracies. Maybe people here are more skeptical of certain institutions compared, for example, the Scandinavian countries where life is, you know, what's the problems in Norway and Sweden and Denmark? It's what kind of t-shirt to wear in the morning. No, I know that they have other problems, but of course, but what I'm saying is that they didn't have this, they don't have this kind of tensions. The society is not so polarized. But look what's happening in France. I mean, with Le Pen's party becoming such a strong political power in France. See what is happening in other countries. Certainly in the Middle East, we see much distrust of the political institutions, although most countries here are not being defined as democracies, but more authoritarian. But we are in a good company with many other democracies. With the external conflict and with the internal divisions, we may be a bit more to the less happy side, but basically the same issues. In fact, what we see is that left and right in Israel nowadays on many issues is very similar to the Democrats and the Republicans in the United States. Very similar. The positions of so many issues are the same. And in a way, I once heard a very nice presentation by an American scholar who showed how Democrats and Republicans, for example, drink different beers. They drive different cars. Democrats are more fond of cats, where Republicans are more fond of dogs. I mean, of course, large scale, not individualist. And we have some similar issues here in Israel, because it is not only on issues. It is more like what they say in German, Weltanschauung or worldview, that have so many components: cultural, religious, lifestyles. I'm sure that you can walk through the streets of your town and look at the person, and not 100% sure, but you can guess what's the political positioning by looking at the outfit. Certainly, if you talk to them for 5 minutes, even if you don't talk politics, you can sense who this person is. Certainly, if he's going with a T-shirt, I am for Trump, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you. Any questions from here? Okay, so I'll pass it, please. Please introduce yourself. Just say who you are.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm Eric Gonzalez from Brooklyn. My question is, looking at the chart as it relates to low confidence in the Israeli citizens' ability to influence government, how's that impact voting rates in Israel between Jews and Israeli Arab citizens as well? Is it and are you seeing different voting patterns based on this different trust in government?
Absolutely, I don't need it. I have it. We have, as I said, Israeli society is highly politicized. We have very, very high voting rates in Israel amongst the Jews. Actually, it is very close to 70, 72%, although it's not 72 because we have many eligible voters who live out of the country. So you should recalculate. We see 68, 69, but with those missing, it's over 70% of those who actually use their writing votes. Amongst the Arabs, it depends when. It depends on the level of tension at the time of the elections. Because of what happened in the last 2 years or so, we expect to have a very low turnout in the upcoming elections amongst the Arabs. They were about 50, even close to 60 sometimes. We expect now to have only a 40% turnout in the upcoming elections. But this will boomerang on the Arab population, because if they don't go and vote, then the way that the votes are being shared here will give much more weight to those whom they resent, because the proportions will be such that it will, and the way that they are dividing the extra votes will benefit the right. So it is like, we have a saying in Hebrew, I don't know if you have it in English, in order to upset the face, you cut your nose in order to upset your face. I mean, this doesn't make any sense, but apparently, and sadly, we expect this to happen. And indeed, the Arab politicians are trying to convince them to go and vote, be it for a specific Arab party or another party, or even parties on the left who are more attentive to the needs of the Arab population. But, as much as we would like to think that we are all very rational actors, actually we are not. We're not. And we make some decisions that are not necessarily to our benefit. And apparently this is going to happen in November.
Thank you, Tamar. Thank you. Thank you to all the whole audience that joined us both on Facebook and on Zoom. And we are staying here in Israel with our group. So thank you again, and looking forward to seeing you all again in our webinars, the webinars of AIFL that we are having every week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.